Hey Mark, hopefully this works. I don't have my video stand with me or whatever, but totally agree that the feedback loop off of mats is tricky. Um, so something I do sometimes is if somebody's hitting off of mats and they're unsure, they're not aware of the fact if they're hitting the low points too far back. Um, Something I'll do is just put a towel down. You can see that. So the towel's about 6 inches behind the ball. You kind of got to play around with it a little bit, depending on the club, maybe, and like the radius and that kind of stuff. But hey, if you can hit a good shot off of a mat and not touch this towel, then your low point is in the right location from front to back, and the arc height is in the right location from up to down. If it was too far down, I would hit the towel. If it was too far back, I would hit the towel. If it was too far high, I would hit a thin shot or a skull or a top. Okay, so the only way to hit a good shot in this scenario, if we're not changing the shape of the circle, which could be a potential too, would be to have the low point in front of the ball and the height of the arc low enough in order to just get the ball on the club face. So that's first thing. But totally agree, mats are tricky. Second thing, I don't really think that the actual low point in 3D space really changes that much. It might change a little bit based on some of the stuff you're talking about, and I don't know, like the radius of the arc and things like that, the different clubs that we're hitting. But if I'm hitting a sand wedge, the sand wedge here, hey, my low point is going to be 5, 6, 7 inches in front of the ball on a good shot, and then the actual height of it is going to be slightly below the surface, right? Like, I don't know. I think on TrackMan, I realize sometimes it's like zero point 0.1 inches below the surface or something like that. I don't think it really changes when the ball is on the ground, right? If I was hitting a 7 iron here we go. That low point is not really going to change in space. It's still going to be somewhere up here, right? 5, 6, 7 inches in front of where the golf ball would theoretically be. Okay, it's still going to be up here. I'm just going to move that ball position a little less back, right? So that low point from a left to right, front to back standpoint didn't move. I just moved relative to the golf ball. So now that club's not traveling quite as down at impact. Right now, maybe it's only traveling 4, 5, 6 degrees down instead of 7, 8, 9 degrees down. And now that low point relative to the golf ball is now maybe 4 inches in front. I'm making up numbers here, by the way, but just kind of general sense, okay? And then even with a driver, hey, that low point's still kind of somewhere up here, but now I'm just moving the ball more up in my stance. So the low point direction, I don't think changes too much. And then from a height perspective, I don't think it changes too much except with a driver when the ball is in the air. Maybe, hey, when we're hitting in the rough and stuff like that, the ball's sitting off of the actual ground, that can change. Or, hey, yeah, sometimes on Zoysia, you have a little more room for air underneath the ball because the ball's sitting up a little bit. Like it's different than being off of tight Bermuda versus like kind of long Zoysia, the stuff that Sean's talking about. Like, hey, you can have the arc height a little bit higher than the actual ground and still hit a good shot just because the ball's sitting essentially up on a little bit of a tee. 2 inches, probably a little much. I don't know if much grass that exists that's 2 inches high. It's fairway grass off of a rough. You could obviously do that, but like, hey, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. So I don't think that the actual low point changes that much. We change the setup a little bit. We move the ball position around. Like, rarely are going to see people with success keeping the ball position in the same place because that would have ramifications on the loft of the club. And if we're hitting a really low lofted club and we have the ball in the middle of the stance, then it's probably not going to have a lot of loft on it. The club's probably going to be still traveling down quite a bit at that moment in time, and therefore the ball's not going to go in the air. So what do? We move the ball position, but where that low point was in space was still pretty similar. It might change a little bit, of course, but like, hey, I don't think it's massively changing as we change different clubs. And I also definitely don't think the height of it is really changing on any good shots. I mean, it might be changing a little bit, but not like crazy. Like, hey, sometimes I do realize that the center of a sand wedge is further from the bottom of the club than with a 4 iron or with a 3 wood. So, hey, maybe the height changes a little bit. Like you said, maybe a couple tenths of an inch, something like that on a good shot, but I don't think that height is changing too much. And I don't think the actual low point in space is changing too much. We're changing it relative to the golf ball just based on the ball position. But where it is, if I make a swing with a sand wedge and a 7 iron, I think the low point would be in a similar location. I'm just moving the ball position to account for that based on the outcome of the shot. Hopefully that makes sense, and didn't ramble too much. Thanks.